I'm back.
Hello and welcome to today's live stream. We are so excited to have you today. Today we're going to be talking about some digital storytelling using photos and videos to tell compelling stories with my friend Paul Gero. So while you are waiting, we're about 4 minutes out. Do me a favor and put your name and where you're from in the comments below. With less than 3 minutes to go, it looks like we already have 6 or 7 people in here joining us. Welcome, welcome. Tell your friends, share on Facebook that you're joining us here today, and let us know where you're joining us from. Hello, hello, hello. Good morning in some places, good afternoon in others. I hope you're having a good day. I hope that this week is going well for you. We are kind of in that slope where we're getting ready to go into the weekend, and we are excited that you are hanging out with us on today's Lunch and Learn. And I've been excited about this one for a very long time. So I want to real quick say hello to a couple of our regulars here. Hello, Jim Summers. You are checking in from the state of denial. Love it, love it. My friend Mike is joining us from Copley, Ohio. Hello, Mike. Hope you're doing well. And of course, Jen Stint has become a regular. And thank you so much, Jen, for joining us today from Pennsylvania. Hello, everybody, and welcome. It looks like we have a nice little group here, so thank you so much for joining us. So as I was saying, I'm really excited for today's talk because it has to do with digital storytelling and the combination of photo and video to tell a compelling story. So a little bit of history really quick. I met Paul and if you've watched, we did actually a Pints and Pixels where we talked about his COVID-19 portraits a couple weeks ago. But so if you've already heard this story, I apologize. But I met Paul. I drove all the way to Chicago when I was using Sony at the time because a Sony artisan was coming to speak at a camera store out in Chicago. So my friend and I drove out there, and I connected with Paul, and we've remained in contact ever since, and he's become a close friend of mine. So I'm excited to bring Paul on because I remembered when I went to WPPI, even before I knew him, there was a project that he had worked on that had to do with documenting high school football. And I remember watching he was up on the Sony stage at WPPI and sharing about this project. And then it was also on the booth. And it was just such a cool story that he followed this high school team and he spotlighted this high school team and gave them the NFL treatment and put together an awesome project. So, you know, he's continued, and this was years ago. So he's continued on and he's been at the forefront of combining photo and video. So that's why I wanted to bring him on here today, was so he could talk a little bit about, you know, the tools that he uses, his workflow, and just a little bit more about how he got started combining the two. So I'm going to go ahead and get Paul on here. How are we doing today, my friend?
Hey, TJ, how are you?
I am living the dream, as they say, living the dream here in Ohio. So I covered a little bit on the who you are on the little intro there, but tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, the type of stuff that you shoot, and then let's get into it. Let's start talking about it.
Well, I live in Wisconsin, and that's where I grew up, but I left Wisconsin in the mid-'80s, and I never thought I would come back, but it's funny how life kind of throws curveballs at you. And about 18 months ago, my wife and I sold our house in California, and we moved back to a small town about 20 miles from where I grew up, and to be close to family. And we sold our house, and we thought we would never leave it, but we did. And so now I'm in the back in my home state, and we're enjoying the kind of the tranquility of a small town compared to kind of the frenetic energy of suburban and urban living. And what I do is a combination of portraits, weddings, and now doing more video. And that's for commercial clients as well as for, I'm wanting to expand that into a more portrait thing. But like you said about the football project, I did a project last fall with the local team here where the goal is to do two things at one time, is to shoot a coffee table book and to make a movie. And I want them both to be as great as I can make them, but I also want them to be very self-contained. I don't want a big production. I want to be able to do it all by myself. And when I switched to Sony, it was back in 2014. And the main reason I switched was because of video, which may seem odd for somebody who's made their career entirely with still photography or primarily with stills. But I think the future is video. And if you look at what's happened in the last 3-4 months, video has really, it's a part of our everyday existence. Stills are also powerful. There's no two ways about it, but video tells stories in a way that still photography cannot. And that's what I was always looking for, was this combined tool that would allow me to do coffee table quality stills, but also movie quality video. And that's why I switched to Sony. And this was even before they've got what they've got now. This was back in the HD days. And now
Right.
with the 4K capabilities of these cameras and the eye autofocus capabilities of the current crop of full frame cameras, what these cameras can do is nothing short of miraculous, I think. And so now
Absolutely.
it's combining the two and learning how to work them, because it does take a little bit of a new way of working and a new rhythm and a new way of configuring cameras. And that's what I've been working on for the last really strongly for the last 2 years since we've been here, is to get to that point where it's seamless. And I'm starting, it's, like they say, when you learn a foreign language, you start dreaming in that language. Well, with video, it's like when you start thinking of the default would be a video as opposed to a still, then you're starting to take in kind of that videographer filmmaker mindset.
Absolutely. And I have your webpage pulled up. You had mentioned that you were following a local team. And are these the images that you were talking about?
They're some of the stills. And before this, as this COVID crisis started, that was going to be my project, was to get the football book done. And then the next thing you know, I'm doing another portrait project that's very time critical because of the, who knows how long that was going to go on. So I kind of put those plans on pause for a little bit to do this COVID book project. And I ended up photographing 130 families and have done all the post-production for them. It was a lot of work, but they were short sessions, but it was still a lot of post-production. But now the book has got to come back, and I've got to edit the video of it. So it's just one of those things. It's a never ending. I feel like I'm always backlogged. I'm always trying to catch up. But
absolutely,
that's just the way it
so
goes.
Now, how did things change with COVID-19? I know you had you were doing the COVID-19 portraits, which we have a whole discussion where we talked about that.
Sure.
But then you also were doing some other stuff too. Like, were you doing like wedding? Like, didn't you have a wedding or an event that you were shooting as well?
Well, like my business was shut down based on the stay-at-home order here, the safer-at-home order, and it was also, people were so unsure. So that first 3 to 4 weeks, people were really, even in our little town where we had very little kind of outbreaks, or we didn't have. I mean, in our whole county, I think we've had about 110 cases and 3 fatalities, which are tragic, of course, although I just don't know what the demographics are. The bigger cities, the urban density of Madison and Milwaukee had much higher counts, like Chicago or New York. Nothing like New York, though.
Right.
But we were still taking it serious, and because we just didn't know, and we hunkered down. But I was still doing these projects from a safe distance with long lenses. And so, of course, it impacted my business, because portraits were kind of shut down because people just weren't in the space of thinking about this. They're finally starting to come out a little bit now with senior portraits. And weddings, of course, got shut down. I had an April wedding that's been rescheduled for next year. I have a June 26th wedding in Florida, and I think that one I'm figuring is going to happen. There may be some kind of stipulations on it, the size and things like that, depending on, but it's in Florida. So it's a state that's a little bit more willing to try things. Whereas a state like Wisconsin it wouldn't have happened most likely, or it would have been very small. But May 16th, I did a live stream, and it was the first time I've ever done a live stream wedding. So I brought my computer and 3 cameras to the church. Ironically, the church that I attended as a kid, Catholic church. And we did a live stream. I tested it out, ran cables. So it was a little bit of a broadcast premiere for me, but it was really fun though too. And there was something that was so cool about that, was that when I was done the wedding, all I had to do was export the MP4 from, I think I used, what did I use? Ecamm Live, because I'm a Mac guy, and exported the MP4 and then just shared it with them. It was a 2 gig file from a full hour and 10-minute Mass, and they got
Right.
the video. So it was really great in terms of the fact that it was done. It,
Yeah,
you
it
know,
was
like,
done. It was produced. You were good to go
yeah,
and move on.
and I had a blast doing it too. It was like I was playing my little ATEM mini like a piano. You know, I was hitting camera 1, camera 2, and had a
And that's
a
really
ball
cool
doing
right
it.
now is the price has come down on so many of these devices. I mean, the camera companies are adding, live stream capability into
Exactly.
the cameras. I mean, as photographers, if you're looking for a new avenue, a new event, a new, vertical to get into, definitely looking at live stream because you're able to, get started with gear that you probably already have and then add that to your line of services. So again, Paul is taking his skills in photo and in video, and then he's adding on that live streaming as something that he can do. So now, how do you go to a client and say you want to do this hybrid approach? So how did you, to get started a personal project, how did you approach the school district? Is that your local school district? Is that a neighboring school district? How do you start off a project like this?
Well, the both the schools were local to me. When we were in California, it was a school that was 3 miles from our house. And the head coach is a friend of ours. Our daughters played soccer together, so we had a personal relationship. And because I did those projects, I had books that I could take them and show them, and the video that I had done. Now, granted, it was a pretty raw video, but I'm still pleased to show it to people because it's just that's where I was starting. I know so much more now, and I do things so much differently, and I think so much better then, but you've got to start somewhere. And I always feel like it's great to start something local because then you don't have to worry about that cost to go anywhere and to stay. And besides, when you're not able to travel or when air travel is restricted or there's quarantine, it makes it difficult anyway. So I wanted to do it locally, and we're a mile from the high school. It's where my daughter's going to go to school next year, and it's our hometown. And our hometown is very interesting because it's small. It's under 6,000 people, but it has a public high school, which is the one I photographed and the one our daughter's going to school. And literally across the street is a private Lutheran high school about the same size. And those kids come from most around the area. So they come from sometimes as far as 40 miles away to go to school. And they're very competitive, and they're in the same conference. So when they have a crosstown rival, it's a true crosstown rival, and that it's in a small town makes it even more magnified, I guess. And so it's just kind of the one of the neat little benefits of being in this town. Plus, people are very open to whatever I want to do. And I talked to the coach. I told him what I was going to do. We met for a cup of coffee, and I showed him my books, and he said, "Okay, great, let's do it." And they just welcomed me like I was part of the team, and it was a fantastic experience. And
That's pretty cool. It's one thing I on the sidelines, I would find a lot of parents, of students that are playing. And I worked for the school district when I was doing a lot of the sports. So, that was kind of my entry onto that field. But you didn't really have a connection other than, you live there close and your daughter's going to be going there. But it's not like you already had a kiddo that was playing, but you went and you showed them, hey, this is what I want to do. And you're not looking, you're not saying, hey, I want to take pictures and then, sell them and do this. I want to build awareness. I would assume that you want to build awareness for this program. And what is the story that you're pitching to this coach? How are you, let's take that coach meeting a little further. You showed them the books and then you started, but what story are you trying to tell?
What I'm trying to tell for them is the complete story of their season. And that's what I think is so strong and compelling about these cameras, is that they allow you to do complete storytelling. I've always felt like still photography is a little bit incomplete. It's powerful, but it's missing something. It's missing motion. It's missing music. It's missing the voice. The other day, it was about 3 weeks ago, my wife woke me up in the morning, and her memory for the day had come up, and it was my son when he was 3. And he was hitting the baseball with it, like a wiffle ball on a t-ball, or no, I was tossing the ball to him. And his little voice was so cute and precious, and we'd forgotten about how it sounded, and we just smiled at the thought of it. And I've had photos of him from that time, but the video is really what makes you remember and makes you laugh. And so it was at that point that I had this true revelation that it was like 50-50. Stills are powerful for 50% of the things, and video is powerful for 50% of the things for me. And that's why it kind of took this little burden off my shoulders about thinking, oh, what am I? Am I a filmmaker, a videographer, or a still photographer? And it's like, well, why do you have to say what you are? Maybe you're just a storyteller who does both and works well with both mediums. And these tools give us the capability of doing that. And so what I pitched to the coach was that this is what I want to show for you, is having something tangible, a book that you can hold, but also something that you can watch and remember and hear when it comes to that energy of a talk in the locker room, things that you'll never see or hear unless you're there. And this gives people a chance to maybe hear that. So they work on different parts of the brain, but they're both very powerful in their own way. Like, for example, there was a photo that ran from Minneapolis the last weekend, and it was a upside down American flag walking across, being carried across a burning liquor store called Minnetonka Liquors, I think it was, and it was haunting. And it was, to me, it's one of the most powerful symbolic images that has come out of the riots that have happened around the country and the protests. And it's just, that shows the power of the still image, beautifully composed, and also really pulls out your heart. But then there's something about video, when you hear voices and you hear music and you see motion, all of them, they work on different levels, different emotions. So they're very powerful tools. And I think it's really incumbent upon us to take those tools and use them well and use them wisely. And that's what I want to help people get better at, is how to make great photos, but also how to maybe take that skill that they have from using stills to not be afraid of video and to go into that world with confidence. And you ask, well, why would a school let me, a photographer, do something like that? And part of it is that it just feels like that's what I got to do. And so when you come from that place, is like, you have to be there. And maybe that's because I spent 20 years in journalism. Like, I wanted to be at the front. I love to be on the front row of these kind of things. And so they can kind of tell that, oh yeah, it's almost like he's supposed to be here. That's kind of the way it is.
Right. And now I'm like getting all these questions in my head, but I wanted to, like, the nitty gritty of the project. So there's a physical book and then a video. Now, in previous projects that you've done that went for a donation, like, how is that? I mean, is there, like, are you just selling them outright? Like, how do people?
With the book, I'll design it and sell it and make a little bit of money on it. I mean, it does take time to do it, and sure, not anybody's required to do it. I'm trying to decide. The COVID book, I'm going to do a Blurb book, and it's going to be a trade book, just because it's going to be so big that I've got to do a trade book, which is a little bit lower quality printing, because it keeps the cost down. It's going to probably be a 280 page book or somewhere in that range. Oh, wow. Because if you figure 2 pages per family, there's 130 families, that's 260 pages, plus right, another, 20 more for intro and exposition and all that stuff. So it's going to just take space. And then the football one, I want to be able to design it so that I don't feel like anything's left out, but it's also not overly just crammed with images, if you know what I mean. I think the photographer's dream was to always be able to have everything that they wanted in the story that contributed to telling the story, and not having to let anything necessarily stay on the editing floor. Yeah, right. Now, any movie that you've ever watched, it's probably a 10-to-1 ratio, or maybe less, but depending on the director. But I think with the book, I want to put every photo in that I really want to see in there, so without limitation. So I'll probably do a trade book of that, but with it comes inherent limitations in terms of the size if I use Blurb. But if I do a photo book, I can do a horizontal aspect ratio, like a 10:8, but then the cost goes up. So it's 6 of one, half dozen the other.
So people might not know what Blurb is. So can you tell us what that is?
Blurb is a on-demand printer based in California, but they print all over the world. And then the dream of it is the ability to print one book that's beautifully printed that you can hold in your hands. And one of my best friends, Dan Milner, is their evangelist. He's worked for them for about 10 years, but he's been doing Blurb even before he was hired by them. He's just a crazy advocate for printing your own work and not having to deal with a gatekeeper. Because in the old realm, it was like you were knighted to be able to have a book published. But now you can do your own. And so Dan has always been an advocate for being self-published and doing self-publishing. In fact, one of the things we've done since I've known Dan was I met him in 1993 when he was an intern at the Arizona Republic, where I was staff at the time. And we became great friends then and still to this day are. And we were doing projects on our own. I had a scanner. I bought the first Epson stylus printer, which probably came out in about 1995 or so. And we started to do our own book projects back then with Adobe PageMaker. And it was just crazy how long it took to do this stuff. But we were happy because we could control what we were producing. We could do a layout of stills, text, and titles, and it was a lot of fun. And when you come from a background of journalism where you're basically just doing the photos and then handing it off to somebody and then hoping that things turn out well, sometimes that can be very disappointing. Sometimes it can be very exciting, but there's times when you get frustrated by how it doesn't work, if you know what I mean. So,
yeah. So now, where do you design these books? Do you just do it in Lightroom? Do you use InDesign?
I do all the post in Lightroom, well, Photomechanic, Lightroom, Alien Skin Exposure X, and Photoshop. And then I've been experimenting with using the BookWrite software, which is Blurb's own software that it's free. And you can design the books, put the titling in there. You can drop copy in there. You can move the photos around. It's really pretty powerful. There's other softwares out there. There's InDesign, which is one thing I have, and I've designed books in there. The learning curve on InDesign is a little bit steeper than, say, BookWrite is. BookWrite is pretty user-friendly, and if you've used anything like Rose, which is a professional software ordering for most labs, then you'll feel pretty at home with this, because I think it's also based on a JavaScript kind of code. And then there's other things. There's something that I use called Smart Albums, which is by Pixeloo, and it's Smart Albums, and then there's Fundy Album Designer. And these companies have created an incredible proprietary software to design albums, mostly for weddings and portraits, but you could use it to design books for Blurb too. In fact, they have the templates in their software. So that's another way to do it. It's very fast. I haven't designed anything big with Smart Albums. Not to say that I couldn't, but I just haven't. I've just used mostly InDesign and BookWrite.
So question on BookWrite. Are you able to like enter text and stuff as well?
Yep, you are. Yeah, you can put text on the spine. You can add pages, take pages away. It's really well done. It's a San Francisco-based company, Blurb is, and when they were starting out, I think they were starting out right around the time of a lot of the crash. So it was like 08, 09. So they were able to sign up a lot of, technical people that were in the Bay Area. And so they've amassed quite a staff. And what they've done is I think they've set the standard for the industry. And now there's a lot of companies that do offshoots of it that maybe do more premium kinds of books or slightly different levels of quality, but they hit a like kind of that middle ground above, like upper middle area. That's a price per value and beautifully printed, very well, nicely done, and surprisingly good, especially their photo books. I mean, I am amazed at the quality of their photo books. They have just got that dialed in like crazy. And the trade books are nice too, but I'm kind of a snob when it comes to how things are printed. And so I look at them and I think, oh, it's good, but the stock's not as nice and it's not as thick and the cover's okay. And it's just, it's nice. Don't get me wrong, but it's not as nice as a lay flat photo book would be.
What you want
It's
to
just,
be, right?
yeah.
So when you're looking at, let's get into some of the gear that we're going to need. So, let's say somebody has a camera at home, and chances are if they bought it within the last 3 to 5 years, it does video. So what do you have in your bag? And then what do you suggest people should look for in their gear? Like, what are some of the tools that you use to be kind of that hybrid storyteller?
Well, I would suggest that they not think about what they don't have and just use what they have. And if they have something in the realm of a 35 millimeter or 50 millimeter lens, that's a really great place to start. So keeping it simple, keeping it low impact. So maybe with just one camera and a 35 millimeter. Or if you do have a 24 to 70, lock it down at 28 or 35 and just kind of resolve that you're going to keep it there, just so that you get more disciplined in your approach to the way that you frame. If you look at the movie 1917, which was done by Sam Mendes last year and won the Oscar for best cinematography, the director of photography, the cinematographer, is Roger Deakins. And Roger is my favorite cinematographer. He has done No Country for Old Men. He has done Fargo. He's done Shawshank Redemption. And I didn't even know who he was when I saw Shawshank, but I remember watching the scene when they were panning the yard after Tim Robbins' character took over the warden's office and was playing opera. And there was just, if you freeze framed almost any spot along that pan, you had a beautifully composed still photograph. And that's what I've always noticed about his work, is it's just so artful and so beautiful, but it's also very simple. And he primarily uses fixed focal length lenses. He shot that entire 1917 with 3 focal lengths, 32, 35, and 40 millimeter. And most of it was probably shot on the 40, which is kind of a wide normal lens. So with that in mind, I suggest to people that they keep it simple as well. If it's working for Roger Deakins, certainly it can work for us. And a 35 millimeter lens, I think, is
before
perfect.
You leave Roger Deakins, I wanted to just real quick, before I forget about this, I saw a couple weeks ago where he actually has a podcast now where he breaks down all aspects of filmmaking. So I'm going to put that link in the comments, but I wanted to let people know, like, if you want to learn a little bit more from Roger Deakins, he has this podcast that's out now. So sorry for interrupting, but
no,
I didn't want to
and it's great that you mentioned that, because I've been on his forum, which he's posted, and I mean, you'll actually see some of his drawings for his lighting scenarios for like No Country for Old Men, which I'm kind of a geek on that kind of stuff. Not that I want to work in that world, because it's not the way I want to work, but there's things I can learn from it. And he is a really self-effacing guy. He is not boisterous by any stretch. And I think the strength of it is that his wife is with him and she draws him out and she gets him to share these behind the scenes things that he probably just thinks are just ordinary. But for people like me who don't live in that world, it's fascinating to hear it. And I just think what he is, without a doubt, the best. He's the GOAT of all cinematographers, as far as I'm concerned. So that would be the way I would approach it. Just start with one camera, shoot it with a 35 millimeter lens. And what I do with my cameras is I have my manual settings where I shoot stills. And then I have the quick settings, the number 1, 2, and 3 on the top dial of my Sony. I have those set to video settings. So it's literally just a quick tap of the dial to move from manual stills shooting to zone 1 or setting 1, which is 24p, which is what I use when I'm trying to capture audio. Then number 2 is 60p when I want to do a slowed down kind of effect. And then number 3 is 120p when I want even slower motion. So 24p, 60p, 120p. And those are what are called frame rates. And so it's a little bit different than what we think of from a still photographer perspective. And because the needs for a videographer in terms of what shutter speed you work at especially at 24p, are really different than what a still photographer needs. And how that works is called the 180 shutter rule. And so how the way that you figure out your shutter speed at your frame rate is, say, for example, you're at 24p, double the shutter or double the frame rate. That gives you 1/48th of a 1/48th of a second or 1/50th of a second. So I set that to 1/50 of a second. Now that might cause some problems with exposure on a bright day, and that's where filtration comes into place. That's a little bit more of an advanced step. So what I would suggest to folks that are just starting out is, even though it's ideal to shoot at the 180-degree shutter rule, so at 24p you would be at 1/50th of a second, you can, while you're learning, I think you're free to explore just using higher shutter speeds with it, knowing that the look will be kind of staccato and choppy. That's why photographers can get away with 1/1000th of a second, because it's frozen. But when a video comes up, if you capture it at a shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second, you're stringing 24 full resolution photos at that 1/1000 shutter speed, and it looks very choppy because there's no blur like you might get at 1/50th of a second. So just push the red button and go, if nothing else. And if you want to have audio, think about 24p. If you want to do slow motion, do 60p or 120p. And it's going to take a little bit of kind of having to sit and look at your camera and experiment with that, because I know that it did for me too. Much like what happened when you were starting to learn about how to use shutter and aperture and ISO together. It's a different kind of exposure triangle when it comes to video. Not unlearnable, but different. If you can master it with stills, you can certainly master it with video. And I know there's a lot of videographers who break that 180 shutter rule and have no compunction about doing it. And I'm not one to say that you shouldn't do it or you can't do it, because you obviously can. But I would just say to you, look at the results. Do you like it at the faster shutter speed, or do you like it when it's more at a 1/50th or more, what the 180 rule is? Less noticeable in the slow motions, but more noticeable in 24p when you're at 1/50th of a second. So I hope that's not too techie in the weeds.
No, I don't think so. And I think having the idea of like getting out there and just pressing record and just trying it for the first time is the first step. 100%. Even if you're just using your phone, that's your first step to get started. But before we even get into that, like, how do you, like, what are some tips that you would tell people as far as like finding a story to tell? Like, what are some good ideas to?
I would say start at home. Maybe it's a still life essay that creates movement based on your camera movements. So as a photographer, we see a photo that here's the energy and it rises, and then there's that moment, and then it kind of slows down. Well, when you're shooting video, you want to start probably on the rise up, stay through that peak of the action, and then go back down to the end of it, so that you're not looking for just those snippets of the peak moment. You're looking for that whole arc of that story, that whole little bell curve, if you will, of the time. And it involves movement. But if you look at someone like a Deakins, you don't see a lot of movement per se in terms of how he uses. He lets the movement happen within a frame. And I find that very, very cinematic and very much Hollywood. Although with 1917, they did use basically a full-on gimbal movement, but it was never crazy. And that was one of the things that I always love about his work, is it's very restrained. It's not pointing out technique. It's not just saying, oh, this is an extreme wide angle lens, or this is an extreme movement. Like if you ever saw the movie, like some of the Bourne Identity movies, for example, those have a lot of frenetic, slight micro camera movements that they add to the kinetic energy of the story, but sometimes they can be just would you just sit still and hold it? But it works in a thriller kind of accent. But in terms of like the kind of work that I'm doing, that very different kind of more slow and like the aesthetic for Deacons is kind of the aesthetic that I'm going for in my own little world, and you can apply that to yours too. But I always say start at home, whether it's the people you know, the people around you. Don't go far. You don't have to go far to find photos or videos. Wherever people gather, there's a potential for story, and wherever that is, I live in a town of under 6,000 people, and I am finding stories all the time, and there's great photos here. It's just, how do you see it? And you have to be the one who decides. You have to look and say, that's a photo, that's a video, or that could be a story, because they're there.
Absolutely. And I think after you do it a few times, after you, like when I first started working at Panasonic, I did like a vlog every day just to force myself to kind of create and learn the tools. And you don't have to show these videos to anyone. I mean, I think you should, just to, get some feedback. But I think it's important that you, just like Paul said, find stories around you, even if it's, taking you through your day, taking, like he said, anywhere people gather, there's opportunity for story. And just making that first step and trying. That's where, after that, it's going to be you're just going to go down that rabbit hole, and you're going to have so much fun creating videos. And don't think that they have to be 100% perfect too. I think that's where a lot of people get hung up is, YouTube right now, the production value went up so high on YouTube that people think that, their videos aren't good enough, and because they're not at this level. Well, a lot of those people are full-time. Like, that's what they do full-time. So don't hold yourself to that level. Just every day, try a new technique. Try, adding a little bit, color correcting. Try a little bit at a time. And I think that's going to help you to assemble, a better project, a better story overall.
And just
I did want to, real quick,
sure.
Sorry to interrupt. Mark Toll, our friend Mark Toll, says hello. So I wanted to throw that in there because I noticed that he joined. So hello, Mark. I hope you're doing very well. Great guy. Great storyteller.
He is. The thing is it's just going to be awkward at first, just like it was when you were learning still photography. It's just going to seem, like, what am I doing? I don't know where these things are. It just takes time, and you've got to give yourself that kind of luxury of just being free, like you said, to explore, take photos, even if you never share it, or videos, and just try it. You learn more from your failures than your successes, I've always found.
100%. Yep.
And when I was an intern as a still photographer back in the dark ages of photography, when it was film, we would go out and I would do 3 or 4 assignments a day, come back and process a dozen rolls of film, and then have to print them and then caption them. And it often meant that I was there till well past midnight. But I learned a ton. But what I learned most about was how to do it right when I made the photo, when I exposed for it, so that I saved time on the back end. And it's no different now with digital, and it's no different now with video. After a while, the more you photograph, the more you shoot film, the more you realize what's going to work, what's not going to work, and you'll know when to cut your losses sooner. And I think that's a big part of this whole process. I look at what I shot for a video last August as opposed to where I am now, and I think, oh my gosh, have I come so far since then? So it's always this kind of process of evolution and growth. And you're going to go for a while where you're going to keep going. You'll plateau for a little bit, then keep going, plateau for a little bit, keep going, plateau. And then as you've been in it longer, you go up, and then you plateau for a longer period of time, and then go up incrementally and plateau. And that's just what I found to be the natural evolution of gaining technical and storytelling mastery. It just takes time. It really does.
And what are some resources that you would recommend for someone that does want to hone those skills? Obviously there's the repetitiveness of trying, but like, how would you recommend somebody learning more about how to tell a story or, video in general?
I would look at films, and one way to look at a film is to turn off the sound and then just look at it from how it's shown, and notice when they cut, notice how they cut, how they frame. And then if you understand the tools that they use, you can, like, for example, when you know that a guy like Roger Deakins, for example, is a very much of a minimalist when he does his movies, then you know that, okay, well, it's not about like having 6 or 7 lenses. It's about where do you stand and place the camera when you're doing this, and what is going through the frame that makes it compelling. And it can be light, it could be composition, it could be gesture, all of these kind of things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be beautiful light. Like if you watch a movie called Hell or High Water with Jeff Bridges and Chris Pine, it's actually shot probably in some of the least optimum times of the day, like between 10 and 2. But there's also like some real raw, stark beauty in that too, because it just kind of shows that rough West Texas desert or New Mexico or wherever it was shot. But it's just a function of doing it more than anything. You can watch YouTube videos, you can watch film, but unless you actually do it, I don't think you're really going to gain as much as you would by merely reading or watching videos.
And
at
that's
least
what
for
I
me.
kind of fell into. Well, I'm the same way. Like, unless I do it, I'm not going to remember it. And that's why, like, I'm forcing myself to learn, like, how to shoot better B-roll with slow motion. And I'm just going through and, like, I read all these tutorials and I watched all these videos about it, but it wasn't until I did it, made mistakes with it, and, brought it into the editing room and it all hit the editing room floor and tried it again, was when that's what I'm currently going through, just so I can learn how to do it better. And I think people have to get out of the, paralysis by analysis and just get out there and try it. And there's so many people in this industry that are willing to answer questions and help, from the camera manufacturers to the, influencer artisan like programs like what Sony has, us at the local store. We're able to answer those questions for you. So don't be afraid to ask. If you're running into an issue, reach out and find that person that can help you.
I found a person named Courtney Holmes. And Courtney is an American woman who lives in Australia. She married an Aussie. And so she lives outside of Sydney. And I saw her on Creative Live once, because I've always had this notion of like stills and photo concurrently is powerful, but how do you use it? And she was doing a presentation about how she photographs family life videos in stills and video. And I was drawn to her immediately because I loved the quality of her work, but I also loved the way she taught. She's a very good teacher. And I've learned a ton from her. And she has a community called Filming Life Academy that gears more towards people that are doing documentation of family life. It's not really, it's not very high tech. She works mostly with one camera, one lens for the most part, but she talks about audio and she talks about editing. And, there's a lot of these kind of like micro niche groups that you can find that help people learn. And I have learned a ton from her group. And then I've also learned from Craig Adams, who did one of the first videos about how he set up his A7 III to optimize it for video, because I know how to optimize it for stills, like falling off a log. But how do you craft the custom functions and quick buttons on this camera to make it optimized for video? And so I watched his and then learned from another photographer who shoots both stills and video. And it's kind of now morphed into what I do when I do stills and video. So having the quick buttons, on top of the dial 1, 2, and 3 for my video settings kind of is a direct result of this kind of quest to find out more information about how to optimize the settings. But I only got that by doing it, seeing what did work, what didn't work. And it's just constantly being revised. And now I'm much more confident when I go out, and I don't feel as kind of all thumbs about how I'm doing things. I'm using filtration, which can be problematic, but it's one of those things that you should get to eventually, but it's going to it takes some time. I'm hoping that somebody will come out with a camera. Hopefully it'll be Sony that has built-in ND filters, which would make my life a lot easier. And I think it would be very, a great thing for a lot of videographers. I don't necessarily want to carry an FX9 because the form factor is really geared towards video production, and it's great, but it's not how I want to work. I want to work with A9 II and A7R4 and things like that utilize technologies like eye autofocus, and I want to do it in a small form factor. So there's always just compromises that you're making as you're going and trying to kind of create something out of really not what's been. I mean, it was always a still world and a video world, and now we're bringing two worlds together, and that's what's really exciting for me.
That's awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick break here and go through just a few quick announcements. If you do have questions for Paul, now's the time to get them ready. So if you are looking at, how can you get started with digital storytelling? How, what questions do you have for, what he's been able to create? Now's the time to get those answered. So I want to let you know that we are still open here at the store from 10 to 7 Monday through Friday, 10 to 5 on Saturdays. We will be doing these. Actually, this week is probably the end of the every single day live streams, but we're still going to continue to do live streams. Don't fret. You're still going to find us at this lunch spot. But we're just going to mix it up a little bit in the coming weeks. So if you do have something that you want covered in a live stream, it's almost like a last call. But let us know. Like, we want to be able to create, content for you guys, bring people on to keep you creating, because that is our end goal. So with being having the store open, there are a few guidelines that we have to follow. So if you could do your best when you come in to make sure that, if you're sick, stay home. Obviously, if you have a fever or anything like that. But in the store, we're going through and we're disinfecting things. We have a cleaning schedule that we follow. Normally, I have my mask right here. So that way, in the store, we'll have the, face coverings. We do ask that you wear a mask when you're in the store. We recommend that you stay 6 feet away from anybody else that's here. Our goal with all of this is just to make sure everybody is as comfortable as possible. And if you don't want to come in the store, that's totally fine. We have the curbside pickup available, and then shipping on thousands of items on our website as well. So I wanted to just kind of fast forward a little bit and let you know that we did post another episode of the Talking Pixels podcast. In this episode, on the podcast as a whole, we don't really talk about what gear is out there. We don't really talk about, what sales are going on. That's not the purpose of the podcast. The purpose of the podcast is to talk about the business of photography and how you can take a hobby that you love and turn it into a career. So if you want to find a little bit more information about that, you can go to social.thepixelconnection.com and you can find direct links to the Talking Pixel podcast. But it is in all major podcast tools as well. So if you just do a Google search, you will find that. Pixel Photo Fest is right around the corner. People have been calling and asking, is there any changes? As of right now, we don't have anything to really update. If anything does change, we will let you know. So it is August 14th through 16th, and we're bringing in some of the top talent from all over the U.S. So we've announced the first 10 speakers, but we will have another 5 coming very soon. And if you want to save $100 on admission, you can feel free to use the code Lunch and Learn, and that'll actually save you $100, so it brings your cost down to $99. With Paul being a photojournalist, I just wanted to kind of complement our theme this week, and that is photojournalism. So all you have to do is to submit your photo to win a $50 gift card is follow us on Instagram at the.pixel.connection. Share your entry with the hashtag PixelConnect or hashtag ThePixelConnection. And then this week's hashtag is hashtag PixelJournal. And that will enter you in a chance to win a $50 gift card. And then we will be drawing that on tomorrow's live stream. I think tomorrow's Friday. So it's on Friday's live stream. We are working with Sigma to raise money for local food banks. So if 5% of your lens purchase will go directly to the Cleveland Food Bank. So if you've been thinking about that Sigma lens, now's the time. There's some awesome deals on Sigma lenses, but also 5% of that purchase goes to the Cleveland Food Bank. If you're in need of additional help, we are offering one-on-ones where you can sit down and say, hey, I want to learn video. And we'll sit down and build the class around you. If you don't fit into that generalist category, we'll develop that class for you. So yesterday I had a consulting call for someone that wants to do a one-on-one, and he wants to learn more about Premiere. He knows how to edit in Premiere. He knows how to, titles and transitions, but he wants to know how to color correct. So what we did was we found someone that, does color correction, that is really, really good at it. And we kind of connected them, and we're doing that one-on-one for them. So one-on-ones are a great way for you to go, instead of going a mile wide, more of a mile deep in a certain subject area. So let's see if we do have any questions. I know some people had jumped in, so I do want to say hello to them. Don't want them to feel left out. So hello, Les. I hope you're doing well. Hello, Melissa. Hope you are doing well as well. And then Fred, lighting master Fred, has joined us as well, and he says hello. And I don't see any questions that had popped in. So Paul, where can people find you online?
You can find me at my website, which is Paul, F as in Frank, Gero.com. And then my Instagram is at Paul Gero, at is Paulgero, all one word. And then I'm on Facebook too, but Instagram's a good place to find me. It's and my website, which is probably not as updated as it should be, but one of the cool things about Squarespace, who I use, is that I was able to change it during the time of the Corona project. So I literally took off my weddings and portraits and kind of hid those galleries. They're back on now, but I hid them during that time because all I was doing was just really spending all the efforts on doing that project for about 6 weeks. So and I have only shared a few of them on my website. There's only probably a half dozen out of the 130 sessions. So once the book is done, then I'll share more. But I just felt like I didn't want to inundate that feed with just portraits, like those kind of portraits throughout the whole time.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm going through and looking at all these photos, and I'm just thinking about like all the different stories. And I see you're mixing in, Instagram TV with still photos, Instagram TV stills. So, you're going through and
TJ, that one IGTV is something that I've been just working on, because if I'll post a video like of the one on the middle of those two videos are the most recent ones that I've done. That was a still project that I suggested we do a little bit of video, and it was the video that made that thing go viral locally. It probably got close to 4,000 views, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in this little town of 6,000 people, that's a lot. And I probably got close to, I'd have to look at it again, how many it's got, but just on Instagram alone, I don't know how many it received, but on Facebook where I posted it, it really took off as well. So it was more of a pro bono project, but it also did get a lot of name recognition for me and my brand out in our local community, as did the Portraits in the Time of Corona project.
And that's what I was going to bring this up during our talk. So I guess we're going to digress before we exit the show. But I wanted to ask you, like, how much does these personal projects, like, how much of it is used for like getting more jobs for you, marketing, outreach? Like, do you see that effect where you get more jobs because you do projects like this?
Well, I've booked 3 senior sessions since the end of this, as people are coming out of this. And I have to think that a lot of it is due to these projects that I've done, both the football projects, as well as the Portraits in the Time of Corona, and then the Trinity Pines Retirement Center project that got a lot of things. I mean, people would friend me after they saw it and then say, oh, we need to get our senior portraits done for this year. So for the class of 2020, because a lot of people realize what happened to the class of 20, or I should say 2021. A lot of people realized what happened to the class of 2020 in the fact that they lost the last 2-3 months of their senior year. They're not going to be able to walk like typical, so they realize how fleeting this time is. And, a lot of people want to push away this fact that time is going away, but it is constantly leaving us. And so we have a finite amount of time to do these portraits. But portraits are kind of funny because people think, well, I'll get around to it later, or it's not a good time. We'll do it later. But the reality is you can't ever assume that it's going to be the way it is right now. And you can't ever take for granted that we're given tomorrow. We are only promised right now. And so you don't want to be kind of a downer about it, but the reality of it is set in for a lot of people that's like, wait a minute, this is really important. Family's really critical. This is a milestone event, a high school senior graduation. And I think in some ways what's happened in the first half of this year has really further magnified how important it is to capture these times, whether it's on stills and video, because they are very, very fleeting. Life is very, very fleeting.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. And honestly, I think that is such a good thing for us to end on is to get out there and tell those stories. Now's the time to act. Now's the time to hit that record button and try video for the first time. And honestly, if you need absolutely any help, feel free to reach out to us at the store. Like, just ask for TJ, when you call in, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have, because I want you to, document life as it's happening around you. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. And thank you, everybody else, for being part of our Lunch and Learn. If you have any questions, please let us know. I hope everyone has an awesome week. We'll see you.
Thanks.
See you.